If we told you the success of AI transformation doesn't depend on tools, but on how HR and tech talk to each other, would you believe us? Welcome to another episode of TIDES. I'm your host, Shveta Malhan, and today we are spotlighting the most overlooked but powerful partnership in the AI revolution, HR and tech. Not just as the architects of digital tools, but the co-pilots of how work itself gets redesigned. And to help us unpack this, I'm joined by two trailblazers who know exactly what it takes to lead that transformation. Meriya Dyble, a bold and human-centered Chief People Officer who's helped build cultures that embrace innovation, not fear. And Barry Hensch, a seasoned CTO with a passion for turning emerging tech into scalable, meaningful solutions. Together, they're bringing lived experiences from both sides of the equation. And today we'll explore what it really means to build AI into the fabric of the organization. Meriya and Barry, welcome to TIDES.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Great to be here.
I'm so excited and can't wait to dive into this conversation with you both. So let's get started with unpacking why HR and tech partnership is the linchpin of successful AI transformation. And Barry, let's get started with you. Historically, how has tech viewed HR's role in tech transformations, and why must that shift now?
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, that's such an interesting question because I think, there has been some tension between technologists and HR, team members and employees for forever, it seems. I'm not quite sure why that is, but it's not that it's been adversarial, but it hasn't been particularly collaborative. And I always come back to the general definition of collaboration, which is this idea that two or more parties come together to create something new, stressing the creation of something new. I think what's probably happened, at least I've observed anyway in my experience, is one party or the other comes with some preconceived set of ideas on how things should be done versus actually looking for that collaboration. And so, I think that's a great deal of it is, there's been this tension. There's been maybe this, like from a tech perspective, we come from a purely technology. Oh, we know everything. We're problem solvers. We'll just figure it out as we go. And then sometimes you get into situations with HR teams where they have their own frameworks and there's this, I would say, a little bit of a battleground sometimes on whose is best. In reality, though, of course, we've got to move away from that and just accept and embrace the collaboration and partnership part. But I think historically it's been a bit of a rocky road and it doesn't necessarily need to be. And certainly, having worked with Meriya in the past, I can tell you when you have like-minded folks trying to get to a corporate business objective, it's amazing what can get accomplished when you have that true collaboration and partnership.
So Meriya, what makes HR uniquely positioned to lead AI change, especially when it comes to people experience, culture, and mindset?
Yeah, I think, going back to what Barry just said, it's really about reimagining into something new, right? Like AI isn't just a technology, it's really reimagining the way that we work and how are we going to augment the things that we do to drive customer value. And so there's a technology component, but there's a fundamental human component where, one, we have to understand what is the value for the humans that we serve and why is that going to be better for them? And then what does that mean for the humans that are serving it? And how are we going to augment them in a way that doesn't just, rethink their processes and their tools, but really what is their role in this new way of working and how is that going to deliver for the organization? And so it's not just about thinking about, how are we going to put this new process into the everyday work? It's really about taking a step back and thinking fundamentally differently about the goals of the organization and how we're going to meet the needs of customers and how we're going to get that done. And I think that in terms of change management and mindsets, just being able to facilitate a conversation, regardless of what area of the business you're in, is something that HR can help with, right? Like being able to take a step back and say, like, okay, well, what's this going to mean? And what are the implications going to be? And how are we going to think through that from a technology perspective, a people perspective, a process perspective, and bring it back together in a way that's going to make sense for all of us to come together and still deliver that business value. And so I don't think it's necessarily about just HR leading it. I think that there's a role for HR to facilitate the conversation and be part of that co-collaboration and the co-creation with the other functions in the organization, just as there's much of a role for IT to be part of that co-collaboration and the function, given their expertise and their understanding of how technology can impact the way that we work. No one area is an expert in this at this point. And so the opportunity or the catalyst that we have in front of us is to come together and think about it differently. And that's where I see the opportunity for HR. It's like, how do you get people to the table to start talking and thinking about it differently?
Yeah, and if I might just add on to that, I think so I love what you've just said, Meriya, and I agree completely. And I think there's an element that HR brings to these kind of conversations around speed. I'm not a huge fan of the term organizational change management because I think it's been abused, unfortunately. So it really comes down to adoption for me. But in the spirit of adoption, as a means for humans and people to take advantage of new capability, there's this question of how fast can we really go? And often as technologists, we just want to slam in the next set of features, but there may not actually be readiness. And so I think this, it's almost a healthy, natural tension that can exist between the two teams to come back to what's reasonable for the organization. Because I really do believe that every organization has to assess that differently, or every situation almost in every initiative needs to assess that differently. And I think that's where the HR team can provide a particularly candid and authentic view of what actually is reasonable, how much of that's reasonable versus, again, often from a technology, we're just trying to get to the next feature and on to we're just problem solvers naturally, and so on to the next. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
I love what you said there about readiness, Barry. Readiness of the organization, and then readiness of the teams within the organization and helping leaders think through that.
I'm really curious to unpack why in certain organizations, the past digital transformation efforts have not probably yielded the results that organizations were looking for. And what can we be doing differently this time around, given the kind of transformation journey that organization is on? So from both of yours lived experiences and what you have seen in the past, especially Barry, when you said that you're not a big fan of change management, why is that perception? Why does it exist today? And what caused organizations to not look at change management in the same lens? I just wanted to unpack that because that's a very crucial angle to what we want to solve for going forward when we talk about adoption organizationally.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think I all due respect to all organizational change management leaders. It's again more just about, I think that it's been highly made into a specific type process, right? You have to follow step A before you get to step B, before you get to step C. And I think often, especially in technology projects where there isn't a very obvious path of any of the initiatives that a corporation will do, these are probably the most windy ones, meaning you're always needing to make changes. And I think the conflict or the challenge that I've observed is this desire to follow a more, again, a framework, but in a specific process and specific milestones and specific things at specific times when it actually may not fit where the initiative is. And so, as a rash generalization, this is not the case in all examples, but I do think that plays a big part. And in fairness to HR and organizational change management leaders, IT is also guilty of this, right? Of trying to, again, follow specific types of processes that actually don't mesh with, an adoption plan either. So I think both have to be a bit more open to the idea that there isn't actually going to be one path to follow. It can never be, in my mind, a one size fits all type approach. Anyway, so that would be my viewpoint, at least initially, but love to hear Meriya's viewpoint.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. There's two things in there that are really important. One, we've come from a world of project management and big bang, right? Like it used to be that we could implement things and, have a big launch and things could move forward. But the world has become much more complex and the problems that we're solving is much more complex. The businesses are more complex. Everything is just bigger than that. And so we know that if you're going to go through transformation, you no longer can look at it as a project with a big launch. And yet, fundamentally, we've built into our systems and even the way that we celebrate things as if everything's a big launch. So we've moved to this world of agile and we're iterating, and we know that we do that because things are complex and we need to take in new information and continue to go down that winding path that's no longer linear, to Barry's point. And so I think, one, that's really hard. It's hard to keep that sustained focus on the end game, and nothing changes unless behavior changes, right? And so if you need people to fundamentally take a second, honor the past, be able to then look to the future and want to engage in that future, you need to give them the space, you need to give them the time, you need to recognize where they're at on that journey and then meet them where they're at, and then take them along on the journey and celebrate that journey and the path that they're taking. Because all of that steps, all of that habit changing, all of that behavior changing is really hard. And so if you're waiting for the big launch to celebrate, it's hard to keep people motivated to continue to change their behavior, which is uncomfortable and puts people in difficult situations. And so I think that's one thing, is like going from just project and the systems around that and how we communicate in a project style and celebrate in a project style needs to shift with the new way of working. And the other thing I think that's really important is we don't think about it in sustainability again. Like, we don't think about it as, okay, the end game is 3 years down the road when we've got this big vision and these big outcomes and the growth of the organization and all of these things. We think about it as, okay, we're going to get to now something's implemented, and then what are we looking at next? Like almost a shiny syndrome, right? And this is the long game. We're really thinking about the longer game in terms of organizational growth, and behavior change is a long game. And so those two things come together in a really important way. And we're realizing that, but we're not shifting our systems to really help leaders start to lead in that way, or for organizations to start to plan in that way and to celebrate in that way. And I think that fundamental shift in those mindsets is really important if we want things to continue to evolve and collaborate differently together.
Yeah, and if I might just comment on, you used a phrase which I firmly believe in, which is honoring the past. So again, it's very often in these kinds of initiatives where you're trying to implement new ideas, new tools, reimagine how you're working. You almost sometimes, as a recipient of those changes, you're like, well, that means I've been doing a crap job before now. And that's not at all, of course, what we're trying to portray here. In fact, many companies have been extremely successful doing things for long periods of time. But that doesn't mean we can't look at how a different way could make things maybe even better. But there's a tremendous amount to be gained from really taking time to honor the past, trying to acknowledge all of the great work that had been done, and embrace this idea of shifting to a new world where things maybe could even be better. Now, in some cases, again, these projects have failed, like these major transformational things have failed for a whole variety of reasons. But I do think that some of that is because we haven't spent enough time talking about all the great things that have been done previously, and that it's not all garbage. And in fact, we can, again, adjust. But you also have to follow through on that. Like those involved also need to be able to see how they fit in. They answer that question, what's in it for me, around that change as well. And again, technologists, we haven't been great about that. Again, that's part of what HR is really good at. So how do we harness both of those things to do things even better in the future?
Yeah.
And also from my experiences around digital transformation, I've seen that one, HR typically is not involved in a transformation initiative. If we look at an organization deploying a CRM or an ERP solution, it's usually a change management team, which is tucked under project management in IT, and they're engaged after all the choices and decisions are made. And then they are brought in to say, okay, can you do the communication and training part of the equation, which speaks to the genesis of change management. It was, as a practice, probably introduced to support technical transformations. But I think the kind of change that we are experiencing with IT is quite different from what we have experienced in the past. Like the scope, the speed, the size of this change is significant. I'd love to pick your brain, Meriya, on if we have to reimagine the role of HR and change practice to support this transformation, where and when should the leaders or practitioners of change and leaders who bring in the people dimension be invited to the table to solve for the problem and co-create so that there's a seamless adoption of what we are rolling out in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, the ideal would be when we're defining the problem to solve. When I've seen really fantastic organizations bring their executive team together and start thinking about like, what is our long-term strategy? And as part of this year, in the actions that we're taking, what are the fundamental problems that we're trying to solve for customers or for the business that's going to help us get to that strategy? And if you have a strong people strategist at the table in that, you're starting to define the problem to solve, not just from a technology aspect, maybe a legal aspect, but also from a people aspect. And I really think that the more brains that you can get at the table right from the beginning with all those different perspectives and experiences, the better you'll be at really fundamentally defining the problem to solve and looking for the right opportunities for how the business can best solve that problem. And then you're not looking at it from like just your viewpoint, right? You're really looking at it from all of these different lenses, which makes your ability to solve that problem stronger. And so, right from the get-go, when strategically the organization is thinking about that, but then also throughout when we're thinking about the business plan, I've seen, again, really strong organizations think through all of those different factors when they're putting the business case together in terms of, have we really thought about the readiness of the organization to make this change? And if it's going to be significant, are we going to get the impact that we thought we were going to get from this investment? And are we recognizing the magnitude of what this change is within the context of all the other things going on within the organization? And are we cognizant of the load that people can take while they're also doing their everyday work and they're, thinking about how they're serving customers? And so just having those conversations every step of the way as we're going through those stage gates, I think is really important. I also think that there's something about, we used to always think about change management as like the communication, making people aware and bringing people on board and making sure that they're ready for this, honoring the past. Those are all really important things. We seem to really level off with that level of commitment as the plan continues to grow and as we're continuing to implement. And I think that we need to keep that steady. There's something about the continuous communications, the constant feedback loop from the people that are involved of things that we may not have realized were going to, be tricky, and bringing that back into the conversation all the way back up to, hey, are we taking in all the information so that the business leaders can make the right decisions about how we're going to continue to proceed? And I think that people aspect and that people strategy is part of that conversation throughout the whole thing. So it's not a once and done. It's really a continuation of that team that's forming to make something happen together.
So I think it's, this is an interesting conversation because like both organizations, IT and HR in many companies are service organizations. And so suffer from a little bit of the same problem, which is seen to be far more operational than strategic. And in the case of digital transformation, IT has kind of been elevated more to a, for lack of a better phrase, a strategic trusted advisor type role. But similarly, HR needs to also be, because, is it the many companies will talk about how important their people are, but is it really just lip service, or, do you actually have the strategic focus around the people part of it? Because I think when you do both, lots of great things can happen.
So if we take a hypothetical organization who wants to implement AI into their ecosystem and all flavors of AI beyond just opening up access to ChatGPT and deploying Microsoft Copilot, what do the strategic conversations at C-suite level look like? And very to your point, when the executives are thinking about AI integration, they'll definitely reach out to IT. Would they think naturally about inviting HR to the table? And if not, what's the hesitation? Why aren't they thinking about HR?
Yeah. So again, complicated question, because I think I have to sort of use in some generic viewpoints here. But again, so often these are thought to be, again, technology type initiatives. And like, as we're talking about, it's far more than that. So technology is a component of it, but it's actually probably a smaller component of it. And I think many companies, unfortunately or fortunately or unfortunately, are kind of looking at AI as a bit of as a complete mystery. Like lots of organizations, head in the sand, don't want to even think about this. I think that's a problem. But I also think there's lots of companies that are looking at this as a silver bullet solution to a whole bunch of other problems, and like whether efficiency or otherwise. And I'm not sure that that's the right approach either. So again, I think the value is in the conversation and really being practical about what's possible. Yeah, it's great to have big goals and big aspirations for, how your organization might become better at a certain activity or across a broad range of tasks or whatever the case may be. But there is an element of realism that comes into, okay, what's actually achievable today versus tomorrow versus a year from now? And you highlighted a couple, right? Whether it's ChatGPT, Copilot, or there's several others that we can talk about later too, that, the amount of innovation that's going on, the amount of, pace at which they're moving is incredible. And so there's tons of opportunity here, but it does require sort of all perspectives to be brought to the table. And then, at the senior executive table, a really thoughtful conversation about, the various impacts, lots of good stuff, but there will be some negatives and again, there's, just for human resources professionals, the, concern about people actually losing their jobs as a result of being replaced by AI. And I do think that that's, probably been maybe more overstated than in the press and media than is real. At the same time, there's tremendous opportunity for that potential to happen as well. So I think it, again, ultimately is, and this seems so simple, but talking and collaborating and, and then coming up with a plan that actually can be workable for the entire organization.
Yeah, yeah. So true. And Mariah, what do you think? Like, is a CHRO ready to have that conversation with the CTO and maybe potentially the CFO or COO to talk about what's the people impact of AI as they think about the AI adoption strategy org-wide in different flavors? And if not, how should they be immersing and embedding themselves into that conversation?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person. Much like Barry said, many are, head in the sand, don't really want to think about it, and or are really frightened because they think that it's going to wipe out their teams or maybe the use of people and culture altogether, which I absolutely don't think is true. I was just reading an article the other day from Harvard Business Review, and about 5 years ago, there was a declaration made that basically AI would get rid of middle management. We all kind of laugh about the frost that is middle management, unfortunately. But what we're seeing actually is that there's an increase in middle management in organizations. And the reason why is because as these administrative tasks and tactical things are happening, what they're noticing is that there's still a real need for those leaders to fundamentally clarify the purpose of the organization to the frontline team members, continue to keep them motivated, continue to keep them engaged, and think about how we're augmenting those people with the tools that we're doing. And so it's been a real wake up, I think, for some people that were like, oh, we can cut out this huge piece of the workforce. And it's like, well, or you could augment that piece of the workforce. And all of a sudden your business is, growing exponentially with the same amount of people, and everybody's engaged in it. And so what could that look like? But I think that the reason that people, put their head in the sand is because they're afraid that they don't know or they can't contribute to the conversation effectively. They don't have confidence in that area. And so I think definitely doing some homework, but also, it's a great opportunity for businesses to think about somebody like Yenza 3, right? That can come into the organization and actually facilitate that conversation. And I think something as simple as case studies, right? Remove it from the business at hand so people aren't that emotionally connected to it, and lead your team members, your executive team, through a conversation of a case study. This is a type of organization that might be in a different industry that might be similar to ours, and go through what could it look like to implement AI in that? How would they figure out what are the right solutions for them? What's their differentiator and where would they want to focus the new AI capabilities, and why would that be? And as you work something through a case study together, if it's not your business, you're more open to trying new things and thinking things through. But you're also more willing to hear from other participants because you don't necessarily think you're the expert. Yeah. And so I think going on common ground and something that's easy together to go through an exercise before you tackle it with your own business might be a way to make it safe for the executive team to show up and actually fully contribute, because they're not worried about all these other things that are going on in terms of, do I understand the business enough? Do I understand the economy enough? Do I understand technology enough? And what a great exercise that would be to help bond them to say, okay, are we ready to start thinking about what's the opportunity for us in our business? And, I heard the head of legal say this really interesting thing about the people focus, let's make sure that we bring that into here, because it doesn't matter whether you're the head of IT, HR, legal, whatever the operations, you have perspectives about all of the different strategies that impact your business. and your perspective is important. That's why you're at the table. And so I just thinking again, like, just how do we facilitate that conversation in different ways with the tools that we have out there and the partners that we can bring to the table that are experts. We don't need to be experts in everything, right? Like, we're all on the learning journey, and modeling that behavior at the executive level could be really powerful for your next level of leaders as well.
Yeah, I think
I'm
that
so
learning
glad.
journey is so sorry. I think that learning journey is so important because I think from a truly authentic leadership perspective, like a lot of CTOs are learning this on the fly as well. So this bringing your colleagues along on that journey, you may be literally one step ahead, one baby step ahead of them, but you can at least drive that conversation as a group and learn together because the stuff is moving so fast. So it's difficult, if not impossible, to be truly an expert in all of it at this point. So I think just embracing that authentic leadership quality of curiosity and willingness to learn together, I think is huge here.
It could almost be like book club, right? Like, you're
Yeah.
meeting monthly and you're talking about how you use ChatGPT and what new thing did you build with it, and like just normalizing learning, just being a little bit messy in it. Yeah.
I'm so happy that you both bring this point up because I've also heard in conversations that sometimes, especially people who are on the HR side, feel hesitant to go and strike that partnership with the technology folks because they feel like they don't speak their language. Whereas, I mean, the problem isn't that an HR person has to know when to use the words like API, LLM, and what does LLM mean and which AI technology I use when. It's more around talking about problems that we want to solve together. And I'm sure from a technology perspective, no technologist is expecting HR to speak their language either, right? So we need to kind of diffuse that perception that HR has to be tech experts and speak the tech language.
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
So, talking about tech, I would love to also explore when we talk about AI, what flavors of AI exist out there? Because I mean, majority of us who are not in the technology space have looked at technology from the lens of ChatGPT because that was the easiest way for us to engage with AI. I don't think people who were not close to technology, especially in HR, would have even thought of AI in this fashion and form that would have come and hit us. But I think OpenAI did a fantastic job of packaging AI into a chat interface that was so easily accessible and everybody could leverage and use it. So now when we talk about AI, instantly our mind goes to ChatGPT. But I'm sure there's more complexity to AI than just ChatGPT. So maybe at a high level, can we paint a picture of what are the different flavors of AI? Because I want to unpack with both of you the impact of those flavors of AI that will be implemented in the organization, the human impact of those.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think maybe to start, AI is this concept of artificial intelligence. First of all, it's not new. It's been around for a long time. It's now has I think you hit it. OpenAI has really helped to make it accessible in a new way. Certainly this area of generative AI is where Gen AI, as we're now calling it. So tools like OpenAI or ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, all of these large language models that are I think that certainly lots going on in that space. We're seeing a fair bit of effort and work going on in the augmentative AI space. And this is particularly interesting for me. So my wife is a teacher, works with, basically does early intervention with kindergartners and early elementary. And she has a particular passion for what's called augmentative and accessible communications. So these are typically non-speaking individuals using technology now, and much of it's based on prediction so that they're basically can touch a screen. There's products like WeaveChat, TouchChat, LAMP that basically allow for an interface and leveraging AI to communicate when they don't have an actual voice. So I think there's lots of work going on in that space. And then we're also seeing quite a bit in the agent world. So I think Salesforce most recently is the kind of the loudest boaster around agents. So I think we've seen chatbots now for quite some time, which is essentially the same type of thing. I think the key difference with an agent versus, say, a chatbot is this idea that they can actually take actions beyond just the conversation. So have that initial conversation. And so for me, working in, say, financial services, we may have a bot or something on a website that helps a customer select a product, new credit card, for example. But the agent world actually starts to take that one step further beyond just the recommendation part to the actual, how can we actually kick off the processing of this application and then kind of through its life cycle. But I think the key thing in the agent space is really sort of setting the guardrails, because I think we've seen lots of examples with chatbots in particular where the chatbot is, whether through hallucinations or other things, have gone too far. We've seen some things with airlines in Canada where the chatbots offered stuff that it shouldn't. And just like with people, we need to give some AI some guardrails. So I think those are three. And then there's a whole host of other things in terms of other machine learning opportunities and other, AI-like developments that are happening in the space as well. But I think those are probably the three most common and three most, sort of relevant for the conversation today.
And all three of them have a huge human impact or impact on employee or workforce in an organization. So, Meriya, from your perspective, if those flavors of AI are hitting the organization, how can people leaders create that environment that's conducive for easy adoption of those technologies? Because the moment you hear those kind of impacts, I'm sure naturally every one of us who is in a work environment will feel the fear of, will I even be relevant in next few years, or what parts of my job will be taken away? So how can organizations prep their culture and people for these kind of changes?
Yeah, I actually, this is where I don't think anything's fundamentally changed. Like, we're still talking about humans. So at the end of the day, communication, right? Like, don't try to hide. If the organization's looking at AI, share that with the workforce, be excited about it, and share the opportunities that you're seeing. But also share that it's a learning journey, and like, we're all going along the journey together. And, we don't know exactly what the end game is going to look like, but we're in it and we're starting to think about it and share as people start to learn things and try things. And as people try things, for leaders in particular, it's really about how we react to mistakes, right? Like, as part of learning, mistakes happen, things will happen. And so how leaders react to those mistakes will then decide how people choose to either put their toe in the water again and try something or try to learn something or not. And so leaders being prepared to react to mistakes in a way that says, wow, okay, we don't want to do that again. What do you think we learned from this? And how are we going to make sure that we do it differently next time? And what's the opportunity for the whole team to think about, okay, if we want to prevent that happening, how else might we tackle this? So reacting to mistakes, really important. I think there's also this idea of, it used to be talked about in challenging conversations and like having debate. But here's the thing, like, in order for people to have good collaborative conversations, it's not just about debate. It's actually about ideas and building. It's about people feeling safe, right? Psychological safety to share their ideas, share their opportunities, share their thinking on things. And instead of getting shut down, people are building on it. And so this whole idea of removing but, no, things that we've been talking about for a long time, and really thinking about and or if, right? Like, okay, if we do that, what could be the next steps or what might happen from that? And right, so we're really building and using that language and shifting the way that we take on idea sharing. And then of course, just like building skills, like really building in growth and this idea of skill development into everyday work. It's part of our job to master the role that we're in. Well, in order to master a role, you need to take the time to think about the skills and learn new tools and build these things. Well, all of that needs to be built into the workday. That needs to be part of what we think should be happening all of the time. And we need feedback on how we're doing on that. So developmental feedback from our peers, from our leaders, from all of these different people that see us and interact with us every day. And in fact, it could be feedback from AI, right? Like, it could be feedback that from not a human, from some program that's learning and saying, hey, if you started doing this in this way, it could actually go faster if we remove this step. And so having the openness to really get that feedback from anywhere it might come from, and then the willingness to build on it, I think is fundamentally the way the mindset needs to shift in all organizations if we're going to continue to grow and build at the pace that the opportunities are in front of us. And again, that comes back to fundamental. If you think about it, it's really about psychological safety and sustained performance is what we want to get to in every organization. And when those two things come together is when you maximize contribution. So if we can set the environment for that in organizations, we will be able to bring in things like AI and anything else that comes our way because the environment has been set. And so I think that's the job of HR professionals right now, is to say, what's the environment and the willingness and the readiness for the organization to take in the opportunities like AI and everything else that comes in front of the business, as well as then the everyday work that's happening.
Yeah, maybe back to a quick plug for Meriya, having the great opportunity to work with her in the past. But I remember fondly going through some work together and Meriya prompting with a couple of super valuable conversation starters in cases like this. How might we, or have you considered, or have we considered, more importantly? It's amazing how many times I've used those two starters in different situations, that the conversation all of a sudden takes a bit of the emotion out, because often people are super passionate on these topics. It kind of just gets into that collaborative conversation. So yeah, if nothing else, if you take nothing else away from the conversation today, those two starters I think are super valuable in terms of this conversation, or frankly, just about anything related to, again, my word, adoption, organizational change management, change, whatever phrase you want to use.
Yeah. And I think that approach is very relevant in today's context as well, because yes, HR has to be a great partner with IT and other cross-functional teams in the business to support AI adoption. But HR itself also has to go through an overhaul where AI can support them to augment their capabilities as well. So if we kind of focus on that for a second, because I want to really truly understand, if HR team has to reinvent themselves, what does that look like, Meriya, from your perspective? And what would you lean on technology leadership for support for to help you augment your, let's say, HR department of the future? So help us understand, with the CTO next to you, what would you envision that future state of HR to be, and what would you lean on the technology department for support and help for?
Yeah, in my dream world, people and culture is showing up with really great information about the business and the people within that business and how it's helping us drive business results. And I think right now we get very bogged down in the day-to-day tactical things, administrative things that could actually be relieved from a lot of the HR team by tools like AI. And so I would be looking to Barry to say, okay, one, like our data is very hard to access in most organizations. And so just having a really clean, place to get data, use data, and then use large language models and all of these other things that we have at our fingertips to help us really understand what's happening in the organization and help us predict about what that could mean going forward in terms of, the workforce and our ability to meet the needs of the business, so that HR leaders can show up with that information and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Something as simple as, we have turnover that happens at certain times a year, every single year with this certain area of the business. Like, how might we get ahead of that? Seems so simple, but not many organizations actually enable their HR partners to get that information easily. And so what happens is the partner gets very bogged down in trying to go through all the Excel sheets and find all the things and do in order for them to show up as a strategic partner. And so I think I'd be hoping that we could work together to really think about, like, if your HRIS system, like your people system in the organization, is a wealth of information that we are not tapping to the full extent of our abilities. So how do we start to do that in an effective way and enable our people partners to be real people strategists and show up to the table so that they can enable business leaders to make the best decisions at that time based on everything that we know and where we want to go? That is the dream role, right? Like showing up as a strategic partner. We're in the conversation from the beginning and all throughout what we're trying to do. But in order to do that, we need to enable ourselves and give ourselves the capabilities as well as the tools. So I'd be looking to Barry to help me with the tools, but also the capabilities, because there's a ton of capabilities that IT has naturally that HR could learn from and could really start to help integrate into their everyday practice.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because, I often come back to, in conversations like this, to robots kind of akin to AI in some respects, not entirely, but you look at kind of the general definition of robotics, and it's about removing drudgery. And I think I think HR teams are feel the same effect as many IT teams. We use busyness and some of the drudgery as a bit of a badge of honor. And and really, I'm so busy, and and complain about filling out the spreadsheets as Meriya, as you described, or gathering all this information from the system. But honestly, sometimes there's a bit of satisfaction with that, even though people complain about it. And so, yeah, I think from a technology standpoint, it's really how do we help remove the drudgery so that the conversation can shift, as Meriya has described. But what's interesting, I think, even within the HR space, and I don't want to step, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to step too far into this, but is that almost the adoption element of getting rid of this idea that busyness is something to be proud of and or to be used as a crutch, because getting to that actual conversation and getting to the higher order where humans can be excellent and are excellent at is actually a bit of a different mindset. And that's tough sometimes to for even HR professionals to be able to grasp onto. So
Absolutely. It's so much more ambiguous, isn't it? Like it's, I think many people go to work every day and they kind of know what the day is going to look like. And they fundamentally sort of know what the work's going to look like and how they're going to be busy doing it. And what's scary, regardless of where you sit in an organization, is the world of creativity and the world of like human value is very nebulous. And that's where most of our work is going to go, which is really exciting for some people, but really scary for a lot too.
Yeah. And I think also, the amount of support that HR needs to overhaul, evolve, ramp themselves up to support the organizational transformation when it comes to AI, because it's not just throwing a new technology piece to your points that you made earlier. It's about rehauling the entire organizational ecosystem. The way people will do their jobs and will look and feel very different. So HR needs a lot of support from IT to set up their systems and infrastructure so that they can enable the right choices and decisions enterprise wide. But also at the same time, HR is not the only department in the organization that's going through and asking IT for support on that. Marketing might come to you for support. Finance might do the same thing. So from the technology department's perspective, Barry, would you prioritize HR's request for support? And if you want them to come to you for support, how would you like them to be prepared so that they can give you information, you and your team information in a way that you can make informed choices and decisions on, yes, we can carve out time to support HR and in this fashion?
yeah, it's a very good question, because it's IT as a service part of the organization typically are getting pulled in many different directions. There's again limited time and resource available there. So there are obviously lots of prioritization conversations that would go on. I think, as in my chair, when we're faced with needing to prioritize one initiative over the other, it's almost always coming back to what we talked about earlier, right? So that connection back to strategy and those initial conversations and having a trusted advisor type collaboration on possible options. I think where it's never really that successful, at least not in my experience, is when, HR or frankly any other department says, oh, hey, we just want to implement X solution. Can you help us with that? That's generally not going to appeal to a CTO or frankly anybody in the IT group when they're, because we don't want to be viewed as order takers in that respect. But I think if we're engaged through the discussion and we can see the connection to strategy and can help devise the plan of attack to get us there, I think you're going to be far better off in getting your work from an HR perspective prioritized with IT groups. Then again, if you take kind of the classic view, which is we've just spent 6 months doing our own review. We didn't tell you about it, but we've got the answer to your problem. What we used to call, management by en route magazine, meaning being on the airplane, reading an article and then having this great idea. So I think, that's probably the advice I would give is really the connection to strategy. And then obviously the being a part of the journey, much like, again, IT needs to do that through a number of other things that happen in our world as well.
The same is true for HR, right? Like we're service. And so every area of the business needs service. And we always have to sort of make choices on what that looks like. And I think the more that the organization can make choices about what the top priorities are and try to quiet the noise everywhere else. And then as leaders, like your leadership team are also a team, right? And so they need to support one another in those decisions and then not go off and do something different or whatever the case may be. I think there's also, it's not an all or nothing, right? Like it's not like you get support or you don't. I think there's also layers of support that happen. I've been in really great situations where, maybe the HR priority wasn't the top business priority at that time. And so we said, okay, well, this is going to wait until, next year or the year after. In the meantime, I'll, maybe support you through consulting on, if you're going to work with this partner to do small pieces of it, I'll come in and be a consultant for you, but we won't do the work for you. So it's still staying connected, and there could be different layers of what that looks like. I think the important piece is that we're thinking about think yes first, right? Like yes and what's that going to look like? It doesn't have to be black and white, but everybody's having the conversation together and you're making those decisions together. You're not just going off and doing something that you've decided is best for the organization within your pillar of work and whatever the case may be, because that always ends badly. It always ends with people either feeling like they weren't part of the conversation, so they're not going to support whatever you were doing, or, even worse, that you're spending a bunch of money and you're not getting the return on the investment for the organization because you didn't have everybody bought into that's the problem to solve at that time. And so if you can come to the table as a team and decide on those things, and then the team stays working as a team throughout that, it might not be your first choice, but if you've talked about it and you've all agreed, that you need to commit and move forward in those things together. And when that happens, again, like the best outcomes happen for everyone in the organization, and you all really want the same thing. So stick to that and stop thinking in black and whites.
Yeah. And I'm really curious for both of you to weigh in on an example that I want to share, which I think our audience will really benefit from if we can unpack this. I'm still hearing, and this might not be the case in every organization. Different organizations are at different level of maturity between this partnership of IT and people and culture teams. But I still hear some organizations say that our LMS, our IT team just implemented a learning management solution for us. And I'm not blaming IT team for doing that, but I'm really curious to know how come HR was not making those strategic choices or had that conversation in partnership with IT to make a joint decision. Why is it that we are just reaching out to IT for implement an HRIS, and the IT team goes on its own to find which HRIS is best suited for the HR team? Can we talk about this a little bit around the fact that should it be this way? And if not, what can the teams be doing differently? Like, what do we mean by that conversation being different?
I can start out by saying, I think this is way more common than we care to admit from a technology perspective. I think one of the things, again, just my perspective on this would be, as technologists, we've been drilled to leverage existing technology investments. So meaning we establish partnerships with these giant software companies. The names are all pretty common, so I won't list them off. But so as a result, we tend to say, we know that HR is going to need this system. Oh, this vendor already has one of those, so we're just gonna enable it. And so again, a really bad approach in my opinion. And I think that attitude is somewhat shifting. But we do have to, from a technology perspective, kind of break ourselves away from, we know the answer. Because again, we're problem solvers, and we automatically jump to, the action part. Again, something that I worked a lot with Meriya on in our past life, but very simple model of connect, understand, and then act. Again, IT is all about the action. Like, let's just get going. We don't spend nearly enough time talking about, on the connection part, and definitely not enough on the understanding part to be able to actually deliver. And so in the action part, we make a lot of assumptions, and as a result, probably get weaker overall results, or creating unnecessary friction, because one group or another is not actually in alignment. So yeah, I think again, connect, understand. I almost always come back to that. And if we can only just act after we understand, we're better off. But I do think that it's rooted sometimes in some of these, I'll say, classical problems that we've had to deal with. And especially in companies that are needing to really find a new cost structure, like you're trying to reduce cost. So we kind of get into that. Well, it's this add-on to this other product we've got. It's quite cheap, so we'll just use it. When in reality, it doesn't actually do what we need. Sometimes it's better to actually spend a little more to actually gain the efficiency that's actually better for the organization. So that would be my initial thought. But Meriya, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think it also happens that sometimes those solutions are more than what was needed, right? And so then you're not leveraging all the tools within that solution because it's not necessarily what the learning team is ready to use, or whatever the case may be. And so they might have bought a behemoth when they just really needed something really simple that could have been done in another way. And I think that there is something about the way that we're engaging with IT as well. You know, Barry said it earlier around like, well, nobody wants to just be told like, hey, we need an LMS, go find us an LMS. Like, that's not getting me up every day to get excited about coming in to do IT work. And so there's something about going back to the problem to solve and what Barry said around connect and understand. And I think that HR also needs to be really clear on what is the problem we're trying to solve with this new technology, and how do we know that we're going to solve it? And so then what's the requirements in terms of what we need in order to solve that problem? You know, is it something really fancy? Is it something small? Like, what does it need to do for us? And how is it need to engage with our other tools within the organization? Because having something that doesn't seem like a whole nother area is also really important. But if the whole other area is going to get you something that fundamentally is going to change the way that you're delivering on that learning experience, maybe that's really important. And so it's a necessary evil kind of thing, and you'll work around that experience. So I think getting better at solving the problem, like defining the problems to solve and the requirements that are needed, and then approaching IT from a standpoint of, this is the experience that we want to create for our team members, and this is why it's important, and here's some different things that we'll need in terms of solving that. Can you help us solve it? And let's work together in finding the best solution. It might not even be an LMS. It might be something that, who knows what's out there that, you know, if you're thinking about it, that you can find and do these things. Because I do think that we often come with a solution, not a problem. We come with the solution already baked. So we already have, maybe we went to a really great conference and we saw something, or like, you know what, that's what we want. And we want to just, and so, you know, we also need to just take the time to decouple solution and go into problem solving with our partners.
Yeah. And as we just highlighted, IT is also really good about coming with solutions versus with the conversation. So I think if we both kind of shed that historic perspective, the collaboration will be much, much better.
Yeah, and it's such a good time for us to have that mindset, because earlier, yes, we were all tied with limited technology offerings and whatnot. But if we now truly bring problems to the table, and I will add, if those problems are linked to how it adds value to the business and make it a business problem rather than HR problem, people in HR will get better traction and support from all cross-functional teams across the business. And then that business problem can be debated as, are we going to build something internally or are we going to buy? And HR will get the relevant support. I always use that example, Meriya, and you and I have talked about it. Like in a company in the past that I did work with, they had talent discovery as a problem. So we reached out to IT saying, hey, there's a problem of talent discovery. When the business teams are going to pitch to the client, they can't find the right talent at the right time to support that client pitch. So we had to build a talent marketplace. So instead of shopping and saying, buy us a talent marketplace, we went with a business problem and talked about how it makes company more revenue. And we got the support, and we decided in partnership with IT to build something internally. And the IT team had the capacity, or they gave us the resources to build that internal talent marketplace solution, which was the right fit solution for that company. They didn't want to buy like an AI type platform which would have been suited for 5,000, 10,000 employees. Here you're building something to support 2,000 employees, and build was the right way to go. So I really liked this, the conversation about, let's frame it as a problem and then solve for it from a technology lens. And AI has enabled us to quite a degree to, do little things like parsing skills from resume. You don't need to buy a tool for that. AI can easily help us do those little things.
Remove the drudgery.
That is so true. So now, as we kind of get closer to our last segment of the conversation, I would love for both of you to share a lived experience from your past life and close the imagination gap for our audience who's listening to what does that ideal partnership between HR and IT looks like. So walk us through a use case.
Ryan, why don't you start?
Okay. Well, I think I have a good one. Barry and I used to work together at a bank, and this was years ago, but the bank decided that we were going to shift from Microsoft to Google. And the problem to solve was really around collaboration. Like how do we get the organization collaborating differently and really thinking about how we look at work and moving things forward differently? And so we were tasked with this. And I think what was really different about it was we were asked to come to the table. And so I was there, Barry was there, so HR was there, IT was there, marketing was there, communications was there, and I'm probably missing something. But right from the beginning of this, we were basically tasked with, we need to get the organization thinking differently and working differently with this new tool. So it was really a catalyst for a culture shift. And we're going to introduce this new tool that enables this way of thinking and real cross collaboration. And anybody that works in any organization on email, which is every single organization, knows that, the fear from people of switching from Microsoft, which they've known forever and everybody had on their resume as they were a Microsoft expert, to Google was real. That was like a real fear in the organization. But I think, much like my examples earlier, is that strategically we all came to the table and we spent, I want to say, at least a couple days, Barry, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we spent a couple days in workshops, all of us as leaders, thinking about what is this going to mean? And like, what are our strengths in an organization that would make us ready for this? And then where are our real opportunities? Where are our weaknesses? And we took the perspective from everyone and started to paint that picture together. Like, we were in it from the beginning together. We had very clear roles and goals together. And then we started to strategize together. And throughout doing that, throughout implementing Google, we kept that way of thinking, and we met weekly, we met daily for our stand-ups all together and talked and shared and helped each other problem solve. And while I was taking people through training, for example, or learning experiences to help them get on board, Barry was participating, right? Like, Barry was there and he was participating and he was inviting his team to participate. And he was talking about it from a technology lens in the same language that I was talking about it from a people lens. And I think that strength of partnership and the ability to strategize together and everybody coming without ego, like, we were confident enough that we knew our area, but we were humble enough to listen to what other people were saying. And it didn't matter if it was a people problem or it was a tech problem. Barry was open to me saying, maybe we could try this. And I was open to Barry saying, hey, I think like we need to think about that. And that was, I would say, probably one of the best projects I've ever worked on, especially because it was successful, but also one that I've tried to emulate ever since, right? Like in almost everything I do, because I think that is magic, that ability for all those cross functions to come together and leverage all of the smart people in the room is what made it so special and so successful.
Yeah, I think it's such an amazing example because I view it as a very fond experience. And it's a great example of how a relatively small team, like the core team was like 6 or 7 of us. And then the expanded team was more like, 60 or 70 in terms of a 5,000 person organization. But what a small team that really can kind of throw away the previous so-called best practices and come up with a whole new set that are relevant to that particular environment. And the thing that's always really stuck with me most is how we kind of structured, and a lot of the credit goes to our chief evangelist at the time, Lauren Rubis. But we had 3 phases. The first phase was ignite and listen. And the listening part is, again, back to the idea of connect, understand, act. But that listening part, especially listening to resistance, was enormous. Meriya did an excellent job kind of describing people's fears. It's like messing with somebody's parking spot. You're taking away my Outlook, my email client that I use every day, or you're taking away Excel or like these kinds of products. So that listening phase and really almost embracing the resistance was huge. And then our second phase was all about excitement and discovery, like generating actual interest to being able to move forward. And then we implemented, and then we got to the third phase, which was about adoption and mastery. So getting to a point where we didn't expect people to be experts on day one. Like, we needed to embrace the fact that there was going to be a lot of uncomfortableness in that first day, week, month, but can help people along that journey. But those 3 phases and how we start, and then the naming being very deliberate, was really like, I now use that for virtually all of the work that we do in technology, at least that I'm involved with, because it really does highlight the importance of all those steps. And probably most importantly, the really digging into resistance, because as technologists, we're problem solvers, but we don't like conflict. We don't want to really dig into people's lives or deal with the resistance. We often find that to be a bit adversarial, but in reality, we need to embrace it, try to sit there and understand And then again, provide examples to hopefully invoke a different response the next time, or a slight shift to the positive. So yeah, I think it's an awesome example, and again, one of my fondest career memories as well.
Yeah, I just add on that, like one of the things that I thought was really game changing as well that Barry did at the end of that was, we all went through, we implemented, we launched, we had the success, we moved forward. But Barry was actually thoughtful enough to still go back to, okay, but it's going to continue to be that way. So how do we operationalize this in a way that's going to make sense and will continue to get even further value? So it wasn't just the value of the launch and having everybody on it and using it. It was how do we get people continuing to understand these tools and collaborate and really operationalizing them into our everyday work? And that's really where, again, the magic happened, because he had product owners basically within the organization that was looking at the different Google suite and how could we use it differently in our everyday, and helping teams think about how they're reimagining their work with these collaborative tools. And so it wasn't just about the major, again, launch in the organization, which was a big splash. I was really excited and we celebrated. I think the real value that the organization got in terms of that investment was the ongoing thoughtful behavior change and learning that the organization continued to do. And Barry really spearheaded that from a technology perspective, but also from that fundamental, like, it's about getting adoption over time and continuing to see new opportunities for adoption and value. And that was also something that was really different that I would never not do again. Like, you really have to fundamentally think about how you're operationalizing this and continuing to drive value from the tools that you're putting in front of people.
Well, I might just add one last quick thing, which is to say, you might be listening to this and going, holy cow, that must have taken a long time. Like, from the time we signed the agreement to the time we were live was like 6.5 months. And so all of those first two phases that we described really happened within sort of 3 or 4 months to get to a launch date. And then, yeah, that adoption and kind of mastery phase took longer, but that was intentional. So this doesn't have to be these multi-year, like, again, it can happen fairly quickly. And this, again, a sizable organization, over 5,000 people. So, I think that's probably the other thing I was most prideful about is, the speed at which we actually were able to move to kind of bring the organization along and still have it be successful. As a technologist, that first day, Meriya probably remembers, I would constantly say, it's quiet. This is music to my ears, because no news is good news in this case.
We were all sitting in the war room expecting things and it never happened.
Exactly.
It was very anticlimactic, actually, which is great. Exactly what you want when you're supporting something.
Totally.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful story. I'm curious to know, will you adopt the same playbook when you think about AI integration into the organization? And looks like you had a lot of successes under your belt with your implementation. What would you take forward to a scenario of integrating AI into the organization? And what would you add on, which you didn't have to in this particular scenario because it was not AI implementation?
Yeah, well, I guess I can start, which is to say, yeah, absolutely. Especially those phases that I highlighted, like, again, ignite and listen, excite and discover, implement, and then get to this idea of adoption and mastery. I think what's different from an AI perspective, which was different from what we were experiencing in this particular initiative we're talking about, is there's an even more human element here. Like, it's again, one thing to change your word processing application or your email client, even though those products have, using AI dramatically now and shifting how we work with them, regardless of whether Microsoft or Google. But again, this underlying tension of, well, am I going to actually work myself out of a job? I think it's very different now. So I think there's a whole new sensitivity that has to be placed on that effect and that potential effect. I always come back to Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's Stages of Grief research from the 1970s, which isn't about technology at all, isn't really about business at all. Stages of grief and death and dying. But those 5 stages really describe things so well. And this acknowledgement of going through the 5 stages of grief, and certainly at different paces, is enlightening. And so I often come back to that as well. And especially when we're talking about people's actual livelihoods and how they perceive, how they fit in, and can they pay their bills, and like all of the things that go beyond just the actual work. So yeah, absolutely taking a lot away similar processes. But I think with AI, there's this additional element of the humanity part that is actually more intense than even what we would have experienced, Meriya.
Yeah, I would agree. Absolutely. And with lack of information, people make things up, and it's not normally kind, right? Like they make a lot of assumptions and go up the ladder of inference, and all of a sudden they're even more afraid, and fight or flight happens, freeze. I think there's a couple more in there now, but you don't want to paralyze your organization because they're making up stories because you're not keeping them in the loop and you're not communicating. So yes, I would absolutely follow this model time and time again because I think it works. I think there's a lot of really good things that come in that. I I think there's an opportunity for organizations to try things on a smaller scale and help people go along that journey and learn because it is quite complex and get good at, following those sorts of stages and get good at listening, really thinking about how you're understanding what people are going through, and then really share those stories and what was the process, and get people to collaborate on just bringing people along on the journey so that they start to understand it, they hear it, they see it's not so scary before you try to take on something like a massive transformation. Because I think that's you don't want to skin your knees on that one, right? Like you really want to make those learnings. So if you have an opportunity to do some smaller projects, learn about it, almost like case studies that you can then share in white papers with the organization. This is how the humans went through that, and use the people in your organization. Like the best champions of work are the people that are going through it, that say it in their own language, right? Like you don't need a communications expert to have somebody take a video of, this is what I experienced through this. This is my role, this was my experience, and this is what I think about it now. That just makes it really authentic and real for people. So get those people, early and often, and then use them to help you just disseminate that story to the organization in an effective way in the real voice of the organization, because that is the real voice, the people that are doing the work every day and, interacting with one another before you try something large. But either way, it's those same steps, and it's the engagement with the people and really giving the time and effort to all of those different steps, not just pieces of it.
Beautifully said. All right. So as we wrap up, I have a few questions, and these are like quick rapid fire type questions that I want to throw at both of you. And I want to pick your brain on what comes first to your mind as you hear me say these questions. And I'll start with, what's the one tool that you are currently obsessed with? AI tool that you're currently obsessed with?
Well, I could start. Probably two tools are in the same category, the GitHub Copilot and StarCoder for little code snippets and helping to generate actual code to help solve some of these problems.
I'm really loving Canva and like the ability to sketch something and then have it make it look beautiful for me. I'm not an artist, but I have these pictures in my mind that I've never actually been able to create myself without having to go to someone else. And so I'm loving that, being able to actually turn my own ideas into something beautiful. And then just ChatGPT, honestly, like it just makes everything so much quicker and so much easier. So I'm loving that quite a bit.
Fantastic. And the best leadership advice that you've ever received in one line?
For me, it would probably be from Dr. Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind.
I was going to say that. We mind melded, Barry. I think, the other thing is like, I'm a big fan of developmental feedback, but the best advice I ever got was actually, if you wouldn't go to them for advice, maybe don't go to them for feedback.
That's a really good one. All right. One role that you think will look completely different in 1 to 2 years because of AI.
Gosh, there's probably so many. I think, again, if the roles that are very task-based, very process-based are probably the ones that are going to change the most over this next period of time. Because, again, this is where AI and robots are like, they're good at doing things over and over and can do it 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I think recruitment, like just recruiters. And, I think about how things like LinkedIn will evolve, and the ability for leaders to just see the workforce in a different way is coming to our fingers. And so why would we need somebody in between in order to do those things? So I think unless recruitment reimagines their value add to that piece of the process, which I think they could in many different ways, I think everyday regular recruitment will be very different.
And I'm really curious about this next one. If HR and tech were a buddy movie duo, what would their title be?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can come up with a title, but I think I might just go take a little slant on it, which is which duo does it remind me of? I think HR and tech can be, and maybe it's because it's one of my favorite movie franchises, but Marty McFly and Doc Brown from Back to the Future. I think that element of adventurous wisdom of, collaboration, having a little bit of fun along the way.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'd say Bert and Ernie.
Also my favorite.
Because they live together, they need to get things done together, they don't always get along, but like they're really good friends, and everybody else a little bit confused by their relationship. So
I love it.
All right, last one. One word or phrase that should define AI adoption in 2025.
I think start with purpose is probably what I would say. Like, get started, try some stuff out. And I don't love the phrase fail fast. It's more about learning fast, but take the opportunity to learn, and you're going to have to, you're likely going to change the direction you're going, but you got to get going.
I would just say potential.
That's a really powerful one. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Not just for sharing the insights, but also for showing what's possible when HR and tech shops stop working in silos and start building the future together. This is such a key partnership for organizations, because this is what is going to help organizations reinvent themselves and rediscover themselves as we get into the future of work. So thank you both.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, if today's episode got you thinking or rethinking how your teams approach transformation, do us a favor, share it with someone who's leading change. And if you're that person, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, stay bold, stay human, and keep riding the tide.